Welcome to Politicus, the only podcast that discusses politics and public service from the Portuguese-American perspective. Here we discuss everything from federal policy, local issues, and U.S.-Portugal relations with the goal of driving more discussion and awareness of the issues affecting our nation, our community, and what we as Portuguese-Americans can do about it. And now, Politicus. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Politicus. My name is Angela Samos, and I am here with my co-host, Denise Borges. How are you, Denise?
Hi, Angela. Great to be here for another exciting podcast.
Yeah. We've been getting some great feedback on the podcast, the episodes, and the variety of people we've been speaking to. And so hopefully our listeners out there are still enjoying the conversations. And today, I know that we are interviewing, I think, our youngest podcast guest. So that's exciting because I know one of our goals with this podcast is to reach out to the younger generations and encourage more people, more young people to get involved in public service. So if you would do the honors of introducing our guest, Denise.
Yes, my pleasure. I met our guest last year at the Legislative Dialogues for the Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, FLAD, in Lisbon. He is a state representative from the great state of Massachusetts, Dylan Fernandes. And Dylan, as I have mentioned to many other people, because of his age, because of his dynamic involvement in politics, and also I believe he's going to be a name that we are going to hear for many years in the Portuguese-American community, and I believe not just in Massachusetts, but throughout at a national level as well, throughout the United States. Mm-hmm. So welcome, Dylan. Thank you so much for taking up our invite. And we'll start to, if you don't mind, with telling us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your family history through your involvement in the Portuguese-American community and your Portuguese-American heritage, and how you got involved in the political world, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on, Denise and Angela. Just thrilled to be here and thrilled to celebrate our shared Portuguese heritage with you. And, you know, I got involved in politics at a relatively kind of young age, right out of college. Went to work for Elizabeth Warren on her campaign for Senate in Massachusetts. Then I went on to work for Maura Healey, who's our Attorney General here in Massachusetts. And I worked as our political director, and then went to the Attorney General's office here and worked in civil rights and consumer protection. And really kind of that throughout my life, throughout my kind of early career, the focus was really on standing up for the most vulnerable in our society and really just doing my best to give back. And I think that comes from, in large part, my family background and my Portuguese family background. My father grew up on the Cape and Islands, where I serve as state representative, and he grew up in a family of really, extreme poverty on the Cape and Islands. And he's one of 9 brothers and sisters, and they never really had anything here. They came from a long line of strawberry farmers. But my father, he worked really hard. He started his own company, worked hard to see it grow. And then, this classic American dream story, got to witness the reward of his hard work as his son graduated from college, first person in this very large Portuguese family to do so. And so the reason I ran for office, the reason I've been so involved in public service is just to give back to the community and the state that's given me and my family so much.
Now, you also have taken on some interesting causes. I know from the brief bio that we were privy to at the FLAD Legislative Dialogues. You've been involved in things like you said, equal pay for equal work, clean energy solutions, and environmental issues, and also the LGBT community and the rights of the LGBT community. So tell us, is there one particular issue that has really driven you the most, or do you feel these all intertwine into serving your area in order to have a better society? That's what we all would wish for.
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And my focus is the issues that are most impactful in the district. And when you have a district like mine, and my district is the most unique district in all of Massachusetts because 2/3 of it are islands, and the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. And then I have a chunk of the mainland of Cape Cod and Falmouth. And so for this unique district, there are issues of affordable housing that are really important to me. On Nantucket, the average home cost is $2.4 million. That's the average, which is crazy. It's just profoundly unaffordable. We have an opioid and heroin epidemic that is affecting all of the United States, but Massachusetts and New England are particularly hard hit. And our district, unfortunately, has been devastated by this epidemic. And then environmental issues. When you represent a coastal community, when you represent islands, issues of sustainability are incredibly important. And, I've really taken on at the State House the issue of promoting environment, promoting clean energy. And, I was fortunate this past year. I'm a freshman representative in the House of Representatives. And I was fortunate this year to be the first and only freshman representative to pass a major piece of legislation. And we passed my bill, which signs Massachusetts onto the Paris Climate Agreement. And I think that's a really important message for Massachusetts to be sending, because it's really important that we stand in solidarity with the global community around combating climate change. And with Trump withdrawing from that agreement, the United States is now it's the only nation in the world not signed on. I think that's a national and international embarrassment. And it's so I think it's even more important that Massachusetts stands out and says that, it says to the rest of the world and the rest of the nation that a handful of climate deniers down in Washington, D.C. do not speak for the people in Massachusetts, and that we're committed to fighting global warming.
I'm curious for our listeners, if you could maybe talk a little, just to spend a couple minutes talking a little bit about your district in general. And you've touched on it a little bit, but people are going to have some preconceived notions about Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod and, what kind of problems could be there, right? Because everybody's wealthy, poor wealthy people, right? So why don't we dispel a few of the misconceptions that you think people have about the area, and really some of you've already mentioned one, the affordable housing, as well as the opioid and heroin epidemic. But what are some other issues that I think the average American could really relate to in an area that has this reputation for being so affluent?
Yeah, well, that's a reputation that we try to educate people kind of against on a daily basis, because sure, for 3 months out of the year, from June to August, this district is one of the wealthiest, has some of the wealthiest people in it in the entire world. But that is only 3 months out of the year. The other 9 months, it is a profoundly different district, right? We're in January right now. About 2/3 of the people who are here in the summertime are not here right now. And so the residents of this district are largely just supportive to that summer economy and that summer tourist industry. And actually the average salary for many of the towns that I represent is lower than the state average salary, which is something that a lot of people probably wouldn't realize when they think about the Cape and Islands. But the people who live here year round are largely in the tourism industry. I represent the largest marine biological laboratories and ocean research institutions in the world. So it's a lot of scientists. And then there are a lot of, fishermen, shell fishermen, and women, and those types of jobs as well. So there's not, for 3 months out of the year, the people who have summer homes here bring in a lot of wealth, but that does not represent the local residents. And so combating that perception, I think is really important, especially when kind of pushing for resources for the district. Being able to combat that perception is important. And look, I think my own personal story is a good way of combating that, coming from a large family that grew up in poverty. Is something that people don't really think of when they think of the Cape and Islands.
Is there still a considerable Portuguese community there? Is your family still there?
Yeah. So my family, most of my family is still here. There is a very large Portuguese community here. Many residents come from the Azores, like my family did. My family came from San Miguel, and there's a really proud and rich Portuguese history here. There's Portuguese-American clubs in every region that I represent. And, you know, when I was running for office, one of the things that really attracted people to my candidacy was that I was Portuguese. You know, I think people, especially in southeastern Massachusetts, and I think in New England, seaside New England in particular, that people are looking for new, kind of fresh Portuguese leadership. That's something that really, I think, helped boost my campaign efforts. And talking to a lot of, you know, you go out and do old-fashioned shoe leather politics to win election, knocking on doors and making phone calls. And Fernandes is a name that, you know, pretty much everyone associates with being Portuguese. So I had a lot of conversations with people at the door who, you know, told me, oh, you know, my family comes from the Azores, or my grandmother came from Lisbon, and we've been here for a generation or two. And I think, you know, there's a real desire out there for more Portuguese people to run for office, and for more Portuguese people and for Portuguese communities in general to be more involved in the political process and make sure their voice is heard.
Now, Dylan, in your district and in the area, most of these issues that are dear to your heart and you've worked so hard for, are there any particular of these or other issues that are kind of unique to the Portuguese American community, or have we integrated to the points in that part of the world, like it's happened in other parts throughout the United States, or have we integrated to the point where our issues are just plain old American issues?
You know, I think for the most part, you know, this region has such a rich Portuguese history that a lot of the issues have become ingrained and become just kind of regular American issues, because most of the Portuguese people kind of date their history back to their ancestors coming over because of the whaling industry. You know, Nantucket is known worldwide as, you know, this whaling capital of the world, and so is the Cape and New Bedford. Obviously, you know, Moby Dick highlights Nantucket and New Bedford, and that's all part of southeastern Massachusetts. So there's a lot of Portuguese people here, but I'd say in my district, they're mainly second, third generation Portuguese people who have been kind of really assimilated. But you know, I think there's also a desire there to maintain the Portuguese heritage. And at the State House every year, we have a Portuguese Heritage Day where we bring in people, Portuguese leaders from throughout the Commonwealth who have been active in their community in advancing Portuguese heritage. And we make sure to honor them with a ceremony that usually involves the governor. And so, you know, in the legislature and our Portuguese Caucus in the legislature, we've made real efforts to highlight people in the community advancing Portuguese culture.
And a little bit, so there is a Portuguese Caucus in the state's House of Representatives of Massachusetts?
Yeah, it's small, but it's mighty.
Okay, yeah. And it's basically the Portuguese Americans, or are there others who are not Portuguese Americans but represent the district? Yeah,
it's really luso-american caucus, you know, right. Portuguese American Caucus. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we have representatives from Cape Verde also in the caucus. I think there's there's 8 to 10 members in total, which is fairly significant in the State House. But we want to grow it, and we want to. And one of the things that we're looking at is, you know, how do we encourage Portuguese people to run for office, and that's something the group is looking at.
Right. And that's that falls into the next question. What, as someone, of a younger generation who was involved in the political world, who got involved as an organizer, as a campaign director, as a political director, what would you say to young people who, be it the current political, national climate, blame it on whatever we want to blame it on, but who have become more and more disenchanted with politics? What would you say to them from someone of their generation, to especially end of same ethnic group? Would you say to young Portuguese Americans throughout the United States, what is important, and how would how can they get involved? I mean, not just running for a state house, but maybe at a local level, maybe at a school board, maybe at a local town council, etc. What message could you give to them, to people of your generation, Portuguese Americans that are kind of disenchanted with the current political climate?
Well, look, I think, our president is making the biggest case against apathy that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And so, I would just say to young people and people in young people in the Portuguese community that just to step up and run and put your hat in the ring, and don't let anyone tell you that you're too young to get involved. Don't let anyone tell you that you're too young to have your voice heard or to wait your turn. Look, power, no one wants to give up power. You got to go out there and take it. And that's something that's a message that I really want to send to this community, because look, there's a need out there for Portuguese leadership in the world. And there's a need out there for Portuguese leadership in our local communities. And no one's going to give you power, right? You got to go out there and take it, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. It's a daunting process, but don't be afraid to do it. And I say this sincerely, that anyone interested in running from this community who wants some advice should reach out to me directly. My email is just Dylan, Dylan, with the number 1 Fernandes @gmail.com. Just reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with any young Portuguese person looking to get involved in politics.
That's awesome that you have put that out there and made that offer. Thank you, Dylan. And kind of along the same theme, I should say, before we started recording the podcast, we asked you how old you were, and you made the comment that that's a theme or kind of a recurring thing that happens, people asking your age and saying, oh, you're the youngest. Talk a little bit about what that experience has been like, being on the younger side, and, maybe some of the challenges you've had to overcome, people not taking you seriously maybe, or things like that, because I think there are a lot of young people that want to get involved, but like you said, maybe get discouraged, or somebody tells them not to do something and they back down, right? So tell a little bit about your experience as a young person.
Well, frankly, I came at this where I had a pretty significant background in politics and public service before running for office. And so I had a baseline of experience that really prepared me to run for office. And then, I had that experience, and then I was 26 when I ran for office, and I brought a lot of kind of youth and energy and new ideas to it. And that did not hurt at all. If anything, I actually think my age was a huge boost. And look, if there's any district where it's going to be tough to be a young candidate, it's mine. I represent the oldest county in America in terms of age. Really? So if I can do it, I think anyone can get out there and do it. And so, don't be discouraged. Your age is really an asset if you're a young person running for office, for a couple of reasons. One, it takes a whole lot of energy to go around and meet thousands of people, knock on thousands of doors, make thousands of phone calls. It takes a ton of energy. You're working, 80 hours a week. And so I think that really helps if you're on the younger end and doing that. And then also, look, frankly, you have less to lose if you're running as someone in your 20s. And I think it's really important, even, politics aside, I think it's really important for my generation, people in their 20s, to take calculated risks when they're young. before they're 30, 35, to take risks, make sure they're well thought out and calculated, but to take them, because unlike any other period in your life, you have significantly less to lose. I ran, I didn't have a family, I didn't have children I had to take care of. I didn't have a dog, right? So my responsibilities and the responsibilities of many millennials before settling down are fairly limited, and that actually lends itself really well to any type of risk, but in particular, I think running for office.
Also, wanted to talk to you a little bit about the relationship, the transatlantic relationship between obviously Portugal, the Azores, the Madeira Islands, and the United States and our communities. As I mentioned, you took part in the FLAD legislative dialogues in Lisbon last year for your first time. And tell us a little bit about that experience, because we believe that, we've just about every single legislative person that we've spoken to in the East and West Coast participated. And so we'd like to get everyone's opinion on how you felt about that experience, getting to know quite a bit about the Portuguese political world, and also how you feel the Portuguese communities can contribute to Portugal and vice versa. And in your case, especially with your coastal communities, have so much in common with Portugal, be it the fishing, the scientific aspect, etc.
That's right. Yeah, that's so perceptive of you. I think FLAD is a terrific, world-class organization that does an incredible job of bridging the Atlantic and bridging the United States and Portugal around really kind of shared values and promoting, especially in promoting economic opportunity. I thought that the dialogues were incredibly informative and illuminating, and we discussed a lot of issues that are shared. My district in particular, and thank you so much for bringing this up. My district is home to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which is the largest privately operated ocean research organization in the world, and we also have several other world-renowned biological institutions in the district, and they actually do research in the Azores with whale sharks and other unique marine life that stop over there. And part of the dialogue, we've had folks from FLAD come and tour the facilities here and talk about our kind of shared ocean, and how when it comes to Portugal has one of the largest water resources in the world. And so how can, our unique scientific institutions help Portugal kind of explore uses for those ocean resources? And that was one thing that we discussed at the talks that I thought was really illuminating and helpful. And I think, we have the opportunity to forge some partnerships there.
I think we're almost coming up on our time, but Angela, I think I would kick myself if I wouldn't ask Dylan about Elizabeth Warren. After all, he worked as an organizer for the campaign in 2012. She's kind of a star in one of our political parties in the United States. And so, two-part question, Dylan. First, how was it working for the campaign? It was a campaign with lots of energy, but I'm sure also, a tough campaign like they all are. And second, is she going to run for president?
Oh, boy. I wish I had the answer to the second one. But, well, look, Elizabeth Warren is someone who has been fighting for middle-class families since day one. And this is someone who is really all about lifting up people and helping the most vulnerable in our society, and holding accountable special interests and holding accountable large financial institutions that have gotten away with, frankly, robbing middle-class families across our nation. And so I got involved in her campaign because I saw the economic injustice in the world, and I saw the economic inequality and how profound it is. I mean, it's the highest in America that it's been since the 1920s. And so we have some real challenges here. Elizabeth Warren gets it. Elizabeth Warren is going to fight for the little guy and take on large financial institutions. And so she's terrific. She's the real deal. She's an honest and an incredibly hardworking advocate, and it was an absolute joy to work for her. And she's a terrific boss. I gotta say, she's just a great person to work for. I hope she runs for president. I'll certainly be fighting for her, but it's hard to say, and it's a little early. We got 3 years, so I'm hoping there's a really dynamic and robust field of challengers to Donald Trump, because I think his presidency has been, it's only 1 year in. I think it's safe to say it's been a total disaster and, frankly, a national embarrassment. When I went to the Portuguese dialogues last April, he'd been in office for 4 months, and I frankly felt slightly embarrassed to be American, knowing that Donald Trump was the president of our country, and I think that needs to change.
Well, if anything, it's been entertaining. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's one way I like it.
Yeah. As we do wrap up, I would love to hear about your future. And I know you probably don't want to give too many details, but you are young. You have a long road ahead of you, a lot of years in public service. Any thoughts about kind of ultimately where you want to go? What's your next step? Maybe you'll be president someday. I don't know. Like, what are we planning here?
Well, it's funny. I feel like that's a distinctly American question. Like, what is your
really?
I feel like it's something that I get asked all the time. And right now I've only served a year in office. I'm gonna keep focused on the residents of the district for at least a couple more terms. And, look, I'm a 28 state rep, a 28-year-old state rep. I don't have to pick up the pace too much, I think. But yeah, I'm going to do this for a while now, and then we'll see what happens. Public service and giving back to Massachusetts and my local community is something that I want to do for the rest of my life. So we'll see where that takes me.
Well, hopefully we'll have our first Portuguese-American president from Massachusetts.
Oh, boy. That'll be David Seamus.
Actually, he also would be a very fine candidate as a Portuguese-American, as you know.
You could be his running mate.
There you go.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great.
Well, Dylan, thanks a million for your time. Best of luck to you. I think that you're dynamic. I think that you have a lot of things going for you, as I think our listeners have sensed that and have listened to that. I think that you care about your constituents, and that's, of course, number one for any public servant, whether he or she serves, in a local, a statewide, or a national level. And we're proud of young people such as yourself. We in Portuguese American community are very proud of young people who are taking that step as you have. And again, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and I so appreciate what you're doing and engaging and lifting up the Portuguese community in America.
No, thank you very much, Dylan. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and a pleasure to meet you. It's the first time I've spoken with you. So I hope all of our listeners have enjoyed this conversation as well. If you haven't hit subscribe, please do so right now so that you can hear a lot more really interesting and engaging conversations with our Portuguese American legislators across the country. Share this podcast with friends and family, and please write us a review on iTunes. That will definitely help more people discover us and discover all the wonderful people that we've been talking to. So with that, thank you again, Dylan. Thank you, Denise, for joining again. And thanks everybody out there for taking the time and spending some of your drive time while you're cooking or whatever, but spending some time with us. We appreciate it. So until next time, have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Politicus, the official podcast of PALITICUS, the Portuguese American Leadership Council of the United States. PALITICUS is the premier national organization representing the interests of the Portuguese American community at large. To learn more about PALITICUS and how to become a member or to make a donation, visit www.palcus.org. To submit feedback or suggestions about the podcast, email us at palcus@palcus.org. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the show are not endorsed by PALITICUS.